Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Henley. I want to welcome you all in and say thank you all for tuning in, whether you're watching this on YouTube, whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcaster app of choice, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever it is you're listening, everywhere you can find podcasts. I want to welcome you in and say thank you. Welcome into the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe while you're here if you haven't already. Give this video a like, and please leave your comments down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on anything and everything we say in this podcast, whether you agree or disagree, your thoughts on the Kentucky game or any other game that Tennessee's played since we last did a podcast, or any upcoming games, or anything else you want to comment on down in the comments. Let us know your favorite food. I don't care. We love just to hear from you guys, and obviously comments help out the YouTube algorithm stuff. So gotta plug all the YouTube stuff, Gene. But let's get into the podcast here. Well, you know what we're going to talk about here to start this one. It is Tennessee takes on Kentucky on Tuesday night, a late night tip-off in Thompson Bowling Arena. And Gene, the Vols got revenge. You and I were talking before we hit record here. It was not a shock that Tennessee won the game. I was a little surprised it ended up being kind of the way Tennessee controlled it from, I wouldn't even say from start to finish. It was kind of from like the I guess the 15-ish minute mark in the first half, then to finish, because the first 5 minutes, Kentucky had a lead and it was kind of back and forth for a little bit there. But then Tennessee is able to take control, and they never really let back. Kentucky got it down to, I think, an 8-point lead in the second half, and that was as close as they got it. Tennessee brought it back up to a double-digit lead pretty quickly, and they got it up to a 20-point lead at one point in the second half. Ends up winning by 13, led by 14 at halftime, won by 13, 76-63. Gene, there's a lot to talk about from just this game specifically, so we'll obviously talk about it, but I think I want to talk about some more stuff moving forward too, because this game is important. But there's, to me, in my opinion, just as an important game coming up this weekend. Gene, it was a fun game to watch if you're a Vol fan. Not so much if you're a Kentucky fan, probably, but it was a fun game to watch for Tennessee's offense. That was a crisp showing, at least in the first half, by the offense. Tennessee looked really good. Again, they looked basically polar opposite of what they did against Kentucky in Rupp Arena from their defensive perspective, especially. But I think the bigged takeaway for me and you, I know from what we're talking about, and probably the fan base in general from this game, wasn't Vescovy. He had 18 points. He hit a couple of threes. He was 4 or 6 to free throw line. He did his thing. I will say Kennedy Chandler was a big takeaway. He had a very impressive game too. 17 points, no turnovers, 6 assists, and he was 5 of 9 from the floor, 3 of 5 from 3, 4 of 4 from the free throw line. He looked every bit of a 5-star in that game. I think he's worth talking about a little bit more in a second too. It wasn't Ziegler, though, even though he had a really good game as well. Again, 14 points, 4 steals, 4 assists. He was 2 of 4 from the three-point line. Fulkerson's worth talking about. He looked more like the type of Fulkerson that Tennessee needs, and he's looked like that the past couple games. 14 points, 8 boards. He really abused Oscar Tshiebwe on when Tshiebwe was on defense. Fulkerson was able to use his athleticism that he does have and his quick feet when he had the ball at the top of the key to be able to blow by Tshiebwe and get to the paint. But Gene, the biggest difference maker in this game for Tennessee, and it wasn't the reason why they won by 13, I don't think, or it wasn't exactly the reason why they won, I guess I should say, but I think it's maybe the reason they won the way they did, was Jonas Aidoo, the true freshman who you and I had talked about in the offseason a little bit, and fans were, wondering where he'd been. Obviously, he got sick, and he's more of a developmental guy. Even though he was a 5-star, he's more of a developmental 5-star than, say like a Paolo Banchero or I guess I say his last name, or Jabari Smith, or some of those big guys. But Aidoo comes in this game, plays 18 minutes, 5 points, 7 boards, 3 blocks, and he really bothered Tshiebwe, and he was a rim protector. Gene, he looked like a combination of Kyle Alexander and Yves Pons out there with the way he was able to protect the rim and block shots. So again, there's a lot to unpack from this game. We can talk about the really early technical that John Calipari got, that scrum on when Fulkerson dove and fell to the bench, and there was a scrum there with the Kentucky strength coach and Zakai Ziegler and the rest of the team. There's plenty of things we can talk about from this game that I'm sure we'll dissect in a second. But I think to me, Aidoo is probably the biggest takeaway in a whole multitude of takeaways from this game. Aidoo's emergence as an actual legit defensive option for Tennessee and a guy who I think has earned himself some more minutes moving forward. I think that could be a big difference maker for this team and for the season for Tennessee heading into the last half of February and into March.
Right, and I think the reason why I was probably most impressed by Aidoo was like he just basically did the one thing that is so easily translatable for a high school kid going to college, for a tall kid going from high school to college. Just be tall. Like I mean, that's like there are so many different things. Like you look around and you see a Jabari Smith. That's a special breed. Banchero is actually more what Shibwe size, which is just scary in terms of just the things that kid can do. He's like
Yeah.
6'6", 6'9", like 240. Shibwe is like 255, 260. But like the thing that I like about Do is like his offensive game is not there. Not. I mean that's fine. Like being a 5-star doesn't mean that you are one of the like elite prospects. I think he was like in the low 20s or something anyway, which would tell me that he was more developmental as it was he was just tall. And when you're a guy like Shibwe, who kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyler Hansbrough, and it's the fact he just has this crazy work rate where he's just constantly working. He's got great hands. He's always fighting for rebounds. I mean, that kid is amazing with rebounds. When you average like 14, 15 a game, you're elite at. You have an elite skill, and he has that. But no matter how hard you work, if you've got a kid who's taller, um, quicker, and Aidoo is both of those things, um, and obviously longer, then life gets really hard for you. And I think aside from that one little basket in the second half, which wasn't technically on him, I think they called a foul on Fulkerson.
Mhm.
Um, like Shibwe did nothing against him. I mean, Shibwe actually became a liability yesterday because he gave you nothing offensively, and he's not very quick, so he couldn't really guard Fulkerson. And Fulkerson was able to kind of eat with some baskets on some drives and things of that nature. And obviously, like Fulkerson has an elite skill where he kind of catches the ball at the top of the key. He can, everybody knows he's going left. Everybody knows he's going left, but yet he still is able to go left for a layup. And um, like I think, big picture, there's nothing to take away, but you see performances. Ziegler had some good moments. Chandler had the great first half. Aidoo, I think, was again, in my opinion, was like their most valuable player. Josiah comes out, with and is aggressive until he gets into the foul trouble.
Mhm.
Like everybody that went out there and contributed, like played enough. Like Fulkerson, Aidoo, like the guards, all those guys. Of course, Vescovy. I mean, blew the one little layup, but I mean that's fine. I mean, like I'm not going to nitpick there. I mean, like look, kids, you make them miss shots. Like that's the thing that I think a lot of people will look at the least, like in terms of coaches or whatever. They'll look at your ability to make them miss shots. That's like the least important thing because that's just going to happen. That's basketball. But like you just look at all the guys that they needed to make contributions last night, they did it, and they withstood the Kentucky run. I think the Tata Washington injury kind of helped a little bit, but Tennessee had been in control of that game throughout. I don't think that's changing the outcome. Um, I just think it actually left it less in doubt at that point, especially the defensive effort that a guy like Vescovy was able to do on Kellen Grady, to where Grady can't even get a shot off. The one time he got one shot off when they were trying to scramble back into it. And other than
Yeah.
that, he was like stepping out of bounds um, or breaking 5-footers or whatever. So the things that Tennessee does, they did elite last night. They defend. Kentucky did not get a lot done offensively, and I think that's a game where you need a Washington because he kind of opens some things up for other guys. Um, they're elite defensively, and kind of took away what Kentucky wanted to do. And look, they got great games offensively from the guys they need to get great games from.
Yeah, you mentioned Shibwe there, and it's interesting because if you didn't actually watch that game and you just look at the stat sheet, you'd think, okay, Sheway got his game in. He finished the game with 13 points, 15 boards, and a block and 2 steals. So I mean, you say, okay, he got his double, eight rebounds, 7 offensive rebounds, 3 of 3 from the free throw line. You think, okay, he got it in. He did what he needed to do. But you look a little bit further, even just the stats, again, without watching the game, you see he's 5 of 15 from the floor. That's not very good, especially for a post player. That's not good at all. The guy who's supposed to be, all his attempts basically, aside from that jumper he had. I think he had 2 jumpers from the top of the key, which he's really good at hitting those. He hit a couple of those against Tennessee the first time these two teams played. And I've watched some other times this year. He's got that jumper down. He can nail that really well, mid-range game. But he was bothered. I wish there was a stat, Gene, on the stat sheet that had like number of shots blocked, because I would be really interested to see how many shots Sheway, of the 10 shots he missed, how many of those were blocks? Because I know Aidoo blocked, all 3 of his blocks might have been Sheway blocks. So Fulkerson blocked him once. Heck, Justin Powell even came in and got a block on Sheway at one point there, Gene. So I mean, you're right. Like, they negated him. Yes, he finished with 13-15, but it was an inefficient 13-15. He had 7 offensive boards, and I think 3 of them came in one possession where he got his own miss because he was being bothered so much by what Tennessee was doing in the post there. And you were talking really good point about Kellen Grady and Davion Mintz, the 2 most dangerous shooters, the most efficient 3-point shooters for Kentucky. They finished that game. Grady played 37 minutes. So he played all but 3 minutes of that game, 2 of 9 and 2 of 6 from 3. So he was very ineffective. Davion Mintz, 4 of 12 and 2 of 6 from 3. So Tennessee did a really good job of negating not only Sheway, but like you said, I think partially because Ty Washington was only played 13 minutes and he was out for basically the whole second half there. They did a great job of the defense of being able to fluster Mintz and Grady to where they were not being the effective 3-point shooters they have been for most of the season, and especially the way they were when these 2 teams played in Rupp. So, I mean, Tennessee's offense was really good, but I think the defense deserves, especially in that second half, the defense deserves a lot of credit for being able to maintain control and not allow Kentucky to fight back to get it within more than 8 points. Like I said, that they got it down to that, and that was, I think, the only time they got it below double-digit deficit for Kentucky in the second half there. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many things I want to even. I'm trying to even think about what to bring up. I think I'll stay in the paint actually, because I think we both touched on it a little bit with Fulkerson. Gene, he has been. I think we can say maybe because he's finally knocked off the effects of COVID. We can say maybe it's this or that or whatever reason. Basically, we'd be speculating because I don't know for sure. But it definitely, since the Olivier Camois injury, if I went back and I talked about this in the breakdown video I did, the preview for the Kentucky game, and looked at what Fulkerson had done, since the Arizona game when he got COVID after that game. From that point up until the South Carolina game was like a 9-game stretch. He was shooting like 45%. He was averaging I think 5 or 6 points and 3 boards. You look at from the South Carolina game on, he was averaging, I don't have the average up in front of me now from counting this Kentucky game, but he's probably averaging now about 10 points and 6 or 7 boards in the last 4 games. And look at the last 2 games where he had 12 points and 7 boards, I think, against Vanderbilt. And then he comes out in 14 points, 8 boards against Kentucky, and it has a block as well. And I want to say he had an assist. No, he didn't have an assist. That was someone else I'm looking at. He had a block and a steal. That's what he had. But Gene, we have said this before. You don't need Fulkerson to be what he was a couple years ago when he was an All-SEC player, because I think you've said this exact thing. You saw what happened when Fulkerson is your best player, when he is your All-SEC player. You go 17-14 and you're on the bubble. And you maybe, if you win a couple games in the SEC tournament, you get into the NCAA tournament. But we've seen what happens when Tennessee's best player is Fulkerson. They don't need him to be the best player, especially on offense or even on defense. Like they need him to be a contributor who can give you 7, 8, 9, 10 points and 5, 6, 7 boards. And he's been that the last 3 or 4 games. And he was really good at abusing a mismatch against Kentucky last night. Again, finished the game 4 of 6 from the floor, 6 of 6 from the free throw line. If this is the type of Fulkerson, it doesn't have to be 14 and 8 every night. But if Tennessee can get, again, between 8 to 10 points and between 5 to 7 rebounds from Fulkerson on a consistently on a night in, night out basis over the next rest of this month in March, that is exactly what this team needs, exactly what John Fulkerson needs to bring to this team off the bench.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I appreciate you kind of shouting me out there. I think the way that I've tried to frame it was, um, you don't need the stats that make John Fulkerson an All SEC player, but you need him to be that sort of impactful force. Like you look at guys who are, I don't want this to sound bad or sound funny or whatever. I'm not being funny, but you look at guys who are older,
Mhm.
like at like the next level, like go to the NBA. You don't look at you go look at guys who are older or any sport professionally. Like you don't need now like Tom Brady's like an amazing or an Aaron Rodgers, guys like that are
Yeah.
amazing examples. Like compare him to Drew Brees. Like Drew Brees, you just wanted him. You needed to know that he could conjure up that sort of magic ever so often, but at the end, you could tell he wasn't that type of guy. Like you don't need John Fulkerson to go out there and average 18 and 10 like he was at the end of that last season. When they were successful at that later part of that season, which speaks to the coaching job that Rick Barnes did.
Mhm.
But overall, you were 17 and 13. I know there was controversy, there was turmoil, Lamonte, blah 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 blah. I get all that. I was there, but like all you need that guy to be is to just remind people that I still have that ever so often. Like you want to turn it over to these younger players. Obviously, I know I'm imagining that I'd imagine that Barnes is really just begging. That's why like the performance that Aidoo had last night was so huge because Aidoo, he's begging one of these younger guys, be it Huntley Hatfield, Aidoo, whoever, you know, God, give me something. But it's also good to know that if they're not giving it to you, you got a 6'9" guy that was all SEC at one point in his career who seems to have it's not even really a move, who seems to have something that's pretty unstoppable. Like it's, and some of it just speaks to just being, I say this as a left-handed person, to just playing the game of basketball left-handed because everything is done right-handed in the game of basketball because most of your players are right-handed. So if you're a guy who's just, regardless, you may know in a scouting report, this guy's left-handed, this guy's left-handed, but all of a sudden he attacks the basket and he shoots a shot with his left hand and you're jumping. It's an advantage to be left-handed in the game of basketball because it's like, I don't know percentages, maybe 10% of the guys who play, maybe not even that high. You guard all these right-handed guys. All of a sudden, you guard a guy like Fulkerson who's left-handed, Vescovy who's left-handed. I mean, what they have like 6 guys a couple years ago with Gaines and Vescovy and Bailey and
Yeah.
Josiah, like all these guys who are left-handed. That is an advantage to have because the game, most of the guys you're guarding are right-handed. So you're able to throw this guy here who kind of has essentially an unstoppable move. Again, it's not like Sheboy is like some freak in terms of like 45-inch vertical stuff. He's just a really hard worker. That's what he does.
Hmm.
He's one of those he beats you with effort guys. And like you watch him play, he's just going to outwork you. That's you don't average 15, 16 rebounds a game, unless you are willing to outwork everybody that is out there on the court with you. Um, so like I said, I mean, like when you have a guy like like Fulkerson who can just remind you from time to time the type of player that he is. That is amazing to have because as we transition into the last 3 weeks of the season, you look at some of these matchups now. Look, you may get 5, 10, 15 minutes out of Aidoo, um, maybe not, maybe a little bit more or whatever, but like you figure out pretty quickly. Oh, well, like last night, you figure out pretty quickly. Oh, Sheboy can't do anything when Aidoo's in there.
Hmm.
So guess what? You play him more. You play the
Hmm.
hot hand, even though it's not technically a hand unless it's the hand that's swatting away all of Sheboy's shots. But you're basically playing the hot hand there defensively where you're going with a guy like that. But like again, like I've been critical of their interior game, and it's not like offensively. I still feel the same way. I still feel like it's a weakness, and they're only going to go as far as their 3-point shooting is going to take them. But on the other end of that, of that interior game is the defensive side. And if Fulkerson has been around long enough to where he knows, how to play the game on the interior. Aidoo is something that people are now going to have to factor in. How can we render him useless in games? And then there's Huntley Hatfield and guys like that. How's Plastic doing? Like, what's his status? Like they've been able to figure out a way to be at least serviceable there. Last night was just a grand example of that, in getting a big win at home in front of a really really excited crowd.
What do you do with Aidoo if you're the head coach team? Is it because we've heard, I think Fulkerson has said that he like thinks he's doing better off the bench and wants to keep coming off the bench because of that. So I don't think you're putting Fulky back in the lineup. But Huntley Hatfield, I think putting him in the starting lineup was a necessity because you had Camwell go out. I think Huntley Hatfield's not been bad. He looked more exposed against Kentucky than he did in the previous games. Obviously, Kentucky's better than who Tennessee's been playing recently. But even when he's out there, aside from that defensive lapse that got him taken out of the game real quick in the first 4 or 5 minutes, he looked fine, I thought, in the time he's out there. But is this a case of where Aidoo's like earned starting minutes, or is he a guy that you still feel needs to come off the bench just because he's more, I guess, one-dimensional? Because like you said, his offensive game isn't there yet, and that's fine. Like he's got time to develop. He's a freshman. He's a more talented, higher ceiling version of Kyle Alexander, and as kind of how I'm viewing him. And he's already, I think he's further along as a true freshman than what Kyle Alexander was at that point in his true freshman career. But is he a guy that still just needs to keep coming off the bench? Do you still keep starting Huntley Hatfield? If you're the head coach, Gene, what would you do in this situation?
I would kind of start things like I would keep going the way that they are right now, because you want to kind of be you want Aidoo to kind of be your, in case of emergency, break the glass. You want to make sure that he's still getting like 15 minutes or so in a game, just because like you see it there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I can't think of a really good NBA comp. I just haven't seen the kid play that much. Obviously he still has a lot of development to do right now. I don't know. I mean, I know his video suggested that he just liked to hang around the 3-point line and shoot threes. But I think he's more than that. Like you start seeing the interior stuff. He's just a dunker now offensively. Where I think Huntley Hatfield may have a little bit more, although he seems to blow wide open layups a little too often for my liking.
Yeah.
But like again, I watch it and I kind of feel like you just kind of keep things status quo. I mean, if you're going to make a change, go with Fulkerson. Fulkerson, it's not starting. Like they still go with Huntley Hatfield and Plastic, right?
Yep, that's what they've been doing ever since Cam got hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, I mean, like if you're going to make a change, then I would go with maybe Fulkerson at that, in that 4 spot, like quote unquote 4 spot with Plastic inside. I mean, like I don't want to. I'm not trying to do anything more to load on this kid's plate early.
Yep.
Like you want to make sure that these guys are surrounded with enough, quality guys to where like they don't really have to do all that much. They just have to go out there and just play basketball. And a lot of what you saw from Aidoo last night was just playing basketball. Like those minutes are real easy when you're the guy coming off the bench. Like it's just go out there, just go play. Like I mean, like it's very simple. Like, hey, understand, like your job is to just go be big. You see that guy, don't let him get around you. He can't shoot over you. Just don't let him get around you. It's a pretty easy game plan for you. Like, I mean, all right, that's all you need to do, coach? Yeah, do it for 5 hard minutes. That's all we need. Maybe 7 hard minutes. Whatever the case may be. We'll get you a blow. We'll go get some offense from some of these other guys, and then we'll bring you back in for 5 hard minutes. Or I just mirror, whoever the other team's like biggest inside threat is, like you throw in, you throw Aidoo in there and just kind of let him just mirror this guy for a couple minutes. Like whoever it is, like I don't know if he necessarily can guard like a Jabari Smith, because I need to see that kid out in the perimeter a little bit, like guarding somebody on the perimeter. Because Jabari Smith, man, hey, that's an animal. Like that's a different animal. It is. It's just a different animal. Like that's, that's a kid who you watch him and you're just like, oh, I get it. That's kind of what I thought that like Huntley Hatfield was going to be, but you don't take in consideration that Huntley Hatfield's supposed to be a senior in high school. So there's he's getting hit with a lot of stuff right now. And he may be, maybe if he's back next year, then he's what I thought he was going to be coming out of high school. But Maybe not. Who knows? Maybe he's just what he's going to be. But no, I would not do anything more to load on to Aidoo's plate right now. Just let that kid go play basketball for 10, 15 minutes at a time. I mean, he's so far behind. He just hadn't had a chance to play yet. I mean, the last thing I want to do is roll that kid out there and let him get abused by somebody in one of these late games, to where you kind of really hurt him a little bit. Like, you worry about protecting the quarterback's confidence, but I mean, same thing with some of these freshmen too. Like, they're confident, like you see what Ziegler's done and guys like that, but they've also played all season. It's a little bit different when you just haven't been out there. If he's a junior or senior, I'd say put him out there. As a freshman, let him just kind of just keep doing what he's doing, because he's been doing it pretty well.
I think it's well said. I think that was the way I was leaning too, but I wanted to get your take on it as, someone who played the game more and has coached AAU level. So I was very curious your thoughts on that too. But what before we kind of transition, I guess, to looking ahead here, because you already mentioned Jabari Smith, and they got me thinking about how Tennessee's bigs are going to match up with him and Walker Kessler, and that's going to be the biggest test of the year for Tennessee's bigs, is that day. Not just Sheboy, because that's one guy that Kentucky had that was as a good post player, but man, Kessler and Smith are a whole different breed. So that was, I was thinking about that. But before we move on to this weekend's game and looking ahead too, what you mentioned it, and you and I were kind of talking about it before we started recording here. How much do you really take away from this game, other than the fact that what we talked about with Aidoo and kind of what we talked about from Fulkerson? What kind of grand takeaways are there from this game? Because I don't think there's a lot, because we talked about, and it's only fair for us to say this about this game, because we said the same thing about the one in Rupp. We said that's more of that was because Kentucky just wasn't going to beat whoever they played that night. They shot the hide off the ball, and no matter how good Tennessee's defense played or didn't play, Kentucky's winning that game. It didn't matter. This was a little different. This one, I don't know that Tennessee would have beaten anybody they played, but they would have beaten a lot of people on that court on Tuesday night. I'm not taking away, I'm not saying that this suddenly changes how I feel about this team and say, okay, this is a team that is for sure an Elite Eight, maybe a Final Four team or anything like that. I still think this is a team that could get bounced in the first round, and they could go to the Elite Eight. I still think this team, they've been playing a lot better recently. They're on the 8-game SEC winning streak. They've only lost one game in their last 9. It was that 1-point loss to Texas. So they have been playing better since that Kentucky game in Rupp Arena. I think that was kind of the something you and I talked about, that needed to be the big wake up call for them, the gelling point. And it seems like it has been, to this team's credit. It seems like that's been the point where they said, okay, we can't let this happen again. We're going to make sure we can do everything we can so that it doesn't. But other than the fact that, Aidoo seemed, we all of a sudden have realized, okay, Aidoo's competent and has a role and can play a role and be a good defensive player. It looks like Fulkerson, over the last couple of games, he's finally getting back to being a guy who you can rely on to do something for you. I don't know that we learned anything really new other than that. I mean, Chandler, he looked phenomenal. I mean, he legitimately looked really good, but he's shown earlier this year that he can be phenomenal. Can he keep it up consistently? That's the big issue. Because he's had some really good games and came back the next night and had a bad one. So does he go out against Arkansas on Saturday and not play well? I'll be very interested to see that. Zakai Ziegler, again, that's not a surprise either. He's a guy who has been that high motor player and the the instigator, I guess is a way of calling him, for Tennessee all year. And again, he came out, had 14 points, 4 steals, 4 assists. He had a block again, which is funny. And a rebound, and he was 4 of 8 on the floor, from the floor, 2 of 4 from the 3-point line, and 4 of 4 from free throws. But Gene, I don't think this is suddenly like a big, eye-opening moment. Maybe it was for some national people who had kind of, written off Tennessee a little bit after that Kentucky game, and Tennessee hasn't played a big premier opponent since then, other than Texas, and they lost that game. So maybe it's an eye-opening to some national people, but for people like you and me and the fans who are listening to this who've been watching, game in and game out and follow this team every single day, I don't think that this is maybe to me, the biggest takeaway, other than Fulkerson and Aidoo, is that this, to me, legitimized, I guess, the way that Tennessee's been playing lately, that they haven't just been beating up on, quote unquote, inferior SEC opponents, that they actually played a team that is more talented than them and probably, I think, just is still a better team than Tennessee overall. And they beat them good. So I think that maybe, to me, it legitimizes the fact that Tennessee has improved since that game in Rupp and is a better team, and I think is, playing more consistently now. But I don't know that we can really take away, like, all of a sudden say, okay, this is a team that is, they're going to go beat Auburn, they're going to win the SEC, they're going to go to the Final Four. Like, I don't think it changes my projections of this team drastically. It makes me feel more confident in them, but it doesn't mean I think they're going to beat Auburn, because I still don't think they're going to beat Auburn, even though that is in Knoxville. But it doesn't put like a huge injection of confidence into me, but it does raise my confidence level in this team at least a little bit, though.
So I'm trying to think how I want to go about this, because
I kind of threw a lot at you. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, no, but it's fine. Like, I think this was last night was a hard game to go big picture for all, like, the reasons that you mentioned. I don't know if there's a measurement on this. I don't know if Ken Palm has it or not, but what was the difference in efficiency between? I know it's a big nerd question to ask,
That's
but
a good question.
were they that much? Because I mean, I get it. Everybody, like, I get it. Everybody looks at all. I mean, the grand scheme of things. They're like, man, it's like they beat them down, and I felt like last night was a beat down. I understand it was 13 points, but I felt like it was a beat down.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm also looking. They scored 3 fewer points in that game. I think they shot a worse percentage, Tennessee did, than they did the first time they met. Like, that's like, I look at it, yeah, like they shot like 50-something% from the floor. I'm looking at some metrics here. 1 point, it's like, I get it. It's the nerdy stuff. It's the stuff that people don't really want to hear on a podcast. But like, I'm just looking at, like, there's no perfect measurement. They were slightly better offensively than last night. They were better defensively.
Yeah, you're right.
Looking at
KenPom. Looking at KenPom, you're right. The offensive efficiency number for Tennessee the last time they played Kentucky in Rupp on January 15th was 108.1. Last night when they played Kentucky in Knoxville, it was 111.3. So it was a 3.2 3.2%, whatever, a difference in efficiency on offense for Tennessee. Defensively was the big difference, but yeah, offensively, it was a 3-point difference, which again, that kind of correlates to what you said. They scored 3 more points, 3 less points, excuse me, in this game than they did against Kentucky in Rupp.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that was, again, like, fair or foul. Like, you don't have one of the guys that you kind of plan to have. I mean, I think I heard some stuff for Calipari. Said his gut said don't play Tata, but he decided to play Tata, and then of course Tata gets hurt. But like, that's when you saw what that kid did in the first time they played. Like, that's a big loss. I mean, I say that to say, like, man, I think that I don't think that anybody's ever questioned how good that the Tennessee team is good. I think the biggest concern that I've always kind of had is how good are they when the threes don't fall. And again, I felt like last night was a get back game from the get go. Like, it felt that way. Like, you and I talked. It felt like the games 3 seasons ago when Grant Williams and those guys, they got beat down in Lexington and then came back and beat Kentucky down in Knoxville. Kind of felt that way, and like, you kind of knew. I mean, you kind of knew that that's like, nobody in college basketball has beat Kentucky as many times as Tennessee has. Like, this is not a surprise. This is not. It's why I tell Tennessee fans all the time, like, stop propping regular season victories up over this team, because you've done it more than anybody else. They don't care over there. You've got to follow that stuff up in March. You've got to build your teams to be the best version of themselves in March. And you're not getting anything. Like, you want to. I get it. I do. I 1,000% get it. But I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, like, the same way that, like, that Vandy fans try to prop up wins over Tennessee in whatever sport, and Tennessee fans just kind of pat him on the head like a little golden retriever. I'm like, man, I'm telling you, like, there's Kentucky fans doing the same thing. Of course, like your big fans want to just like sit there and say, I don't want to lose Tennessee. I don't want to lose Tennessee. And I've got, I get that, but like what I'm looking at is like that was a huge win last night, but I look at the reason why it was so huge because you all just kind of, I mean, Tennessee needed to kind of keep pace for one of these top, seeds in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're looking at, like it's bigger than Tennessee and Kentucky. It's the SEC. Like I always argue that Kentucky and Louisville is the best rivalry in college sports because in college basketball because you only play once a year. And you and I talked about that. That's why I still think that as Tennessee fans push back, you need to play Memphis once a year so you can enjoy that victory over Memphis for 365 or 66 or 380, whatever, however many freaking days goes in between games. You want to play them one time so you can sit on that. And they've got to sit on it for a while, and that's what you want. But like this is big because these are two conference teams. This is a conference game, man. Like Tennessee's hot right now. What is they won like 9 of 10 in their loss was a last second play where you and I got mad at fans that are like anti Josiah for taking that shot.
Mm-hmm.
They won like 10 out of 11 or something. Like this Tennessee team is good. Like they're not going to be judged by this game in the middle of February. Literally the day after Valentine's Day. Like, can you continue to build off of this? Because how good is the win over Kentucky if you lose to Arkansas on Saturday?
Yeah, that was. I'm glad you brought that up. That's exactly where I was going to go. And I think that to transition into that, I think that conversation about the Kentucky game has been one of the biggest things I think I've learned from Eugene and kind of taken away from our time doing the podcast when we started off as an SEC podcast and then when we transitioned into what we are now, like a Tennessee specific one, is that I enjoy every win against Kentucky because there was definitely a time in Tennessee basketball history where Tennessee just couldn't beat them. I mean, it was, they would get swept by them year in, year out. They'd be lucky to win one out of every 5. I don't take a win against Kentucky in the regular season for granted, but I have learned to, like you said, not build it up so much to be this grand thing because it's great. And like you said, it's always great to beat your rivals. But I was maybe happier because of the win last night, not just because it was against Kentucky, but like you just said, it moved Tennessee technically into a tie with Kentucky for that 2 seed in the SEC. And I can't remember how the tiebreakers work for the SEC, but we still have, like 5 or 6 games left. So it's not like pertinent right now to know that, exactly. But Tennessee's right there for a 2 seed. If they can avoid that 4 seed, so they don't have to potentially play Auburn in their, the second game where they play, perfect. Don't put off playing Auburn in the SEC tournament as long as you can, because I don't think Tennessee is going to get the 1 seed. I don't think they're going to, end up winning the SEC regular season. But it put Tennessee in a tie with Kentucky for that 2 spot. That to me was the biggest thing from this game. And I'm enjoying this win. I'm going to enjoy this win. But I think, again, to transition to this next game, this game against Arkansas this weekend on Saturday in Fayetteville, Gene, it is to me just as important as this Kentucky game was because Arkansas is playing really well right now. I know they just lost to Alabama, but they stormed back in that game, or Alabama choked it, however you want to say it. But Arkansas is a legit team. I'm about to pull up their schedule as I forgot exactly who all they have beaten and played recently. But they've been playing. I don't think they're. Yeah, that's right. They're the one that beat Auburn. Yeah, they have been playing a lot better. I don't know that they're as good as they were, last year when they made that run late and again to February, March, and they suddenly came on hot. Again, this I guess kind of around the same time last year, and obviously Bama still ended up winning the SEC. But this is a really important game. We Bud Walton Arena. You saw it in the Auburn game. They get rowdy. I mean that is a really good home environment for Arkansas. Arkansas has been a really good basketball program, historically for at least since the 90s. They've been consistently good. I mean, this team, Gene, is they're actually not as good offensively as I expected them to be, but defensively they are very good. Looking at their numbers right now on KenPom, they're 67th in offensive efficiency, but they're 18th in adjusted defensive efficiency, and they have a really fast pace, the number 21 pace tempo, I guess, on KenPom. But yeah, you look at who they've played recently. The Alabama loss snapped a almost like a 9-10 game winning streak. They'd beaten after losing 3 straight SEC games to start off the SEC slate to Mississippi State, Vandy, and A&M. They went and they won 8 straight. They beat or 9 straight because they also played West Virginia. They beat Missouri at home. They beat LSU away. They beat South Carolina and A&M at home. Beat Ole Miss away. Beat West Virginia at home. Beat Georgia away. Beat Mississippi State at home, and then beat Auburn at home. I think those last 2 wins though have been, and they obviously lost to Alabama, and then they beat Missouri. But I think those 2 wins that I just mentioned, Mississippi State and Auburn, those were the ones that really solidified, okay, they are actually playing better and doing well because they've beaten some teams that are, I mean, they beat LSU, yes, but that was also kind of right around LSU was starting to play poorly. But every other game were games that they should have won. They beat Missouri, they beat South Carolina, they beat Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Georgia. So you're like, okay, those are teams that you expect Arkansas to beat and be able to kind of, lick their ego, the bruises, and kind of build up their ego a little bit. But then they go and beat Mississippi State, which is a pretty good team, and then they go in overtime and beat number 1 Auburn at home. Again, you follow that with a 1-point loss to Bama. That's again not anything to that was at Alabama. They're also very tough to beat in Tuscaloosa, and you come back and get a win against Missouri. This game is important. They're 9-4. They're right behind Tennessee and that 4th spot. If Tennessee wins this game, I said on Twitter, like Tennessee needs to do before the Kentucky game. I tweeted this out. I said Tennessee needs to do anything they can to win at least one of these next 2 games against Kentucky and Arkansas. Get one of those really solidifies Tennessee in that number 3 spot in the SEC standings. Well, they got one of them. If they somehow are able to get both those wins and they can go out on the road and beat beat Arkansas too. I mean, Gene, that is a vice grip on, at least to me, the number 3 seed. Obviously, Tennessee ends the regular season playing Arkansas too, and it could come down to that as who's the 3 or 4 seed. But if they beat Arkansas on the road this weekend, Tennessee has their own. I mean, they control their own destiny for being a 2 or 3 seed in the SEC and having to, avoiding playing Auburn in that, I guess, quarterfinal game if they win and advance to the next round or semifinal, whatever it is. But I mean, this game against Arkansas is every bit as important as the game against Kentucky just was.
Right. So this could be interesting because you're going up against the best defense in the SEC.
Yeah, they're really good. Well, them are LSU, yeah.
Like, I mean, no, right now, Ken Palm's got them as the best defense in the SEC.
Gotcha.
Number 1 in SEC play, they're number 1. Number 1.
Oh, yes. As you're saying, I'm looking at that now too. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like that is so like that's why I'm saying I can't take too much out of just the Kentucky win because I get that. Like I get that one. That's the emotional win. That's the get back win. Like that's the one you've got to have. This is a game where you're going on the road, tough environment. I've heard for years that I don't think Tennessee gets enough credit with their home environment, but I also don't think Arkansas gets enough too. And when Arkansas is good, there may not be a tougher environment in the SEC. Like I would put, yeah, and now you see Auburn is growing a little bit now in that regard. Like those 3, you see the SEC that is growing a little bit as a basketball league, which is just interesting. To see, and it's funny that Texas and Oklahoma bring nothing in that regard to that. But it's one of those things where when you look, like this is a huge game. This is bigger than Kentucky because Kentucky's the emotional game. It doesn't take much to get jacked up for that game, especially with what they did to you the first time. But now you're going up against an Arkansas team that seems to be figuring some stuff out. I mean, they're struggling a little bit with some bodies that they just don't have. Now, I mean, like Note is being asked to do a lot. Like they're starting to get some contributions from some other guys, but like Note's their guy, and Note's a good player. But like I'm sitting here looking, can you figure out how to win this one? Like this is the huge one. Like this is the one. Like there weren't many like great victories during their big win streak. I mean, obviously LSU and Auburn, kind of stand out at LSU specifically. And then Auburn in the big game, and that was just a huge game that, like Auburn was, obviously Auburn was number 1 in the country. So, it's not like they've just gone through like a murderer's row. Like I feel like Tennessee's played a tougher schedule in that regard. But man, this is a massive game because like I think you get more out of in terms of figuring this team out off of this coming game as opposed to one you just played.
Well, for one, because
Because
it's
you
a road
knew,
game.
yeah, you knew under the circumstances, you knew that this team was going to come ready to play. You know, when you read the stuff that Zakai Ziegler said about, you know, how much that loss hurt at Kentucky, especially the way they got beat. When you heard the guys talk about it, you knew you were going to get Tennessee's best in that game, and you got it. Games aren't meant to be played perfectly, but they were by far the better team. That's how or not, I didn't see Kentucky winning that game last night. And I thought that before the game ever started. But like this is one you're going into one of the toughest road environments in the league. Um, you're still trying to figure some things out. You like your guard position. You're still trying to like trying to reinvent yourself in terms of interior, with your interior minutes, with Huntley Hatfield and Fulkerson and Plavsic and Aidoo now. Like you're trying to reinvent some of this stuff now. You're trying to figure it out now. So like this is a massive game. It won't be looked at that way. I get that. But I said it's just as big as the game you just played. And not the whole it's the next game, blah, blah, blah. This is a big road game against a team that you're fighting for, you're jockeying for position in the league. It's not the emotional game. So you've got to figure this thing out yourself. You don't just have just built-in emotions. I get it. Like in Tennessee, Kentucky, that's just built-in emotions. Specifically on the Tennessee side, that's just built in there. It's just there. And whereas this is a game where it's a little different. And it's a little different. And Tennessee struggled on the road. Like, have they won a game on the road yet?
Yeah, I mean they won against Mississippi State, and
Yeah,
but that was a decent. That's not a bad win. The Hump's hard to win at too.
right. So I mean, like they've had their issues on the road, and so like for them to take this next step and what they're trying to be, these are the ones you've got to win. Like in yeah, I'm sorry, I'm sitting here looking now. I mean, like the Vandy game was a little bit of a struggle. South Carolina, that was a blowout. I
Yeah.
saw bits and pieces of
No, I
that
mean
game.
you're right though. I mean I've talked about this multiple times in the different breakdown videos I've done. I mean Tennessee has struggled a lot on the road this year, and that Mississippi State win was a good one, but it's not like Arkansas is a lot tougher of a road game. In fact, Gene, if you had to, I was looking up while you're talking. If you had to guess, when do you think was the last time Tennessee got a win in Fayetteville and men's basketball?
Man, like the scheduling's so stupid
I know.
nowadays. I 2006. I'll just pick a Pearl year.
You were not that far off. 2009. Tennessee's lost 6 straight
Okay.
games in Fayetteville.
So yeah, like that, and those aren't always good teams.
Yeah, they
That's
haven't been.
the thing about it.
Yeah.
Like Arkansas is very much kind of one of those schools that could go up and down and up and down, And so like, and like the good thing for Tennessee is you look at the rest of their road schedule. It's at Missouri, at Georgia.
Yeah.
Missouri's considering. We'll see what happens with Conso after the season. What's his face at Georgia is gone because I've already heard some, quote unquote scuttlebutt on who they're after for their next head coach at Georgia. And like they're, I'm already hearing about their next coach. So the one they currently have is pretty much out. So you're talking about teams that are about to check out. Specifically Georgia at this point in the season. So you've got a chance here to pick up a couple. Those are the wins you expect. Obviously, Arkansas and getting Arkansas back at home at the end of the season, that's nice as well. But this is the one that could go a long, long way because you can build some momentum. You can build some momentum off of this one because you can blow out Missouri. You're back. You're at Missouri, and that's sometimes a tough place to play. It's a pesky place to play, but they're not that good this year.
Yeah.
And then you get the big one next Saturday. And we'll see what happens against Auburn. But like, if you can build some momentum by getting a huge road victory, when was the last? Ask yourself this. Like, I don't think there's necessarily a good answer here. When was the last big road victory that Tennessee has had? It may be more recent than I think, But I'm having a hard time because that Tennessee team, that 18-19 team, Gonzaga was neutral site. They got beat
Yep.
by Kentucky. They got beat by LSU. And
I
like
mean,
it's been a
technically
while.
that 1920 team they beat Kentucky in Rupp, but I mean that was a. But
But they weren't
it's hard
good
to
that
say that because that team obviously was a bubble team. But yeah, they beat Kentucky in Rupp. But other than
year.
I
Yeah, I
guess
want to
other than
like yeah.
Kentucky maybe, who yeah that's a good question.
Like that's the one. It's been a while. Well, I'm trying to think the last time that that Tennessee was good, not
Yeah.
upset somebody. I mean, like the last time that Tennessee was good, and the everybody is jacked up to play them.
Yep.
Because like I said, that Tennessee Kentucky game in 1920, man, that was 9 o'clock tip on a Tuesday, right before the end of the regular season, and Fulkerson goes off, and Eve Pons goes off, and Josiah has an amazing, statistical performance. Um, like I remember that, but that was also like a 16 and 12, 16 and 13 Tennessee team at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That whose numbers, yeah, I think they were 16 and 12 because they beat the Kentuckians and they got beat by Auburn last game of the season in COVID. So like it's been a while since you've had a Tennessee team top 25, kind of hanging around in there, and just goes into somebody's house and wins. And look, I'm sorry if I've forgotten. Maybe that I guess Tennessee beat Kentucky last year in Rupp, but that was a good win. But that was all that Rupp team fell apart. That
Right.
Kentucky
That was
team
it.
was
But that was
horrible.
the Kentucky team that was awful last year. Though is a
Yeah,
problem.
so like it's hard. It's a good name victory,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody thought that. I mean, then that Kentucky team was so bad, and you and I talked about this last year on the podcast. I flatly said this Kentucky team is so bad that John Calipari would completely change his recruiting habits. And what did he do? He
Yep.
went and got transfers. He's got like 2 or 3 freshmen. His best freshman won't even play. And like and so he just completely changed everything. You know you're bad when somebody's willing to change everything
Yeah.
because of how bad you are. Everybody. And there's some after the season, sad moment with the whole Terrence Clark stuff. But in
Yeah.
the season, forget it. Y'all stunk. Y'all stunk. And so like it's hard. And I'm sorry. And if anybody, if they're listening and they can find a time that Tennessee was top 25 in the country and went on the road and beat another top 25 team, let us know because I mean, I'm glancing at my phone. I'm sorry. I'm not really at a computer right now. So I'm doing a lot of this stuff off the top of my head and I can't think of a team. Maybe that 18-19 season when they were just kind of just like the scrappy Tennessee team that's kind of similar to this year's team, if we're being honest.
You made the 17-18
Um,
team because that's what I was looking at the 17-18
yes,
team.
yes,
They
17,
were
18. I'm
a
sorry.
top 25 team and beat number 24 Kentucky at Rupp. Again, that's Kentucky, but like that's the best to what your point of where Tennessee it wasn't a big upset because they were an unranked team kind of around 500 beating a ranked squad on the road. It was 2 top 25 teams and Tennessee got a 61-59
Yeah.
victory over Kentucky and Rupp that year in 2018.
Is there one? And look, I don't want to nitpick, but is there
Yeah.
one where it's not Kentucky?
That's no,
Because
that's exactly what I was trying to find
yeah,
was is if there's there another
yeah.
ranked win where Tennessee was also ranked, and they got a road win because it's not going to be
The league
Barnes
now
next
the
2
league
years.
stunk for that's what hurts them is the league stunk for a while,
Yeah.
and then they went out and like them or not, they went out and they got LSU went and got Will Wade to improve the profile of that program, and regardless of where this thing ends at and when it ends, I just assume rather than later it's going to end. He's been good there.
Mhm.
How whatever point to however whatever you want to in terms of how he was good there. It's been good there. Um, but wasn't there like I think like 5 6 years ago there were like 3 top 25 teams in the league.
Oh
Like
yeah,
I
no,
just
I
want to
remember
see a
like
Tennessee
that's when I was in
team.
college. Like that was when
Yeah,
like when the SEC first brought in Missouri and A&M, the SEC was having an issue of we can barely get 2 or 3 teams in the SEC tournament, and that's when you started seeing the change of the hiring of the changing the caliber of head coaches in the league, the recruiting profile going up, other than just Kentucky. Like that's when things started to change. Was about 10 years ago or so.
yeah, and like that's what because like I said, it's very easy to get yourself jacked up Because the fans will get you jacked up to go into Rupp Arena and get a win. They'll do that for you. Like, they will. Like, that's just because they care so much that you just can't help but care. And like, that's your rival. And like, I've always kind of felt like, I've got a lot of family that lives in that state. Like, they don't look at the Tennessee-Kentucky game the way that Tennessee fans do. Like, they look at Louisville as a bigger rival than Tennessee. Like, they do. It's just facts. Mm-hmm. I know that Tennessee has won that game a lot more than anybody else in the country. I get it. I'm just telling you. Like, this in state, it's a little different. But, like, I just want to see Tennessee go on the road and beat a team not named Kentucky. When both teams are good or legit. Don't throw Missouri at me last year. Don't you dare throw that Missouri game at me.
I saw that.
I know what you were thinking.
Yes.
Again, that name just popped up in my head. I said, you know what? I'm pretty sure that Missouri team was ranked last year.
They were like a top 15 team when Tennessee played them.
They beat Illinois. I remember that game.
Uh-huh.
So I cared a little more about all the other stuff because that was when it was the SEC podcast. Like, don't give me that game, man. Because now we have a little bit more information. Because Missouri got ranked in a COVID season when there was when they played one Illinois team and beat them, and nobody knew anything about anybody. Everybody.
I think they beat Wichita State too. Like they had wins that looked good on paper, and then Missouri imploded that year.
Yeah,
last year.
I mean, heck, Tennessee was number 6 in the country at one point.
God, I forgot they were that high ranked.
They were top 5, top 6.
Yeah,
they were. I mean, Springer and because they beat their whole non-conference was at home because you couldn't travel last year. So there was a lot of stuff that was weird about rankings. Like, man, there's 3 weeks ago in the season. We have more information. So I don't know. Like I said, we've gotten off track here. I'm just simply saying I want to see Tennessee. This is the game, and this is your last chance this regular season. This is the game where you go out there and you beat somebody, and people are like, wow, that's a huge victory. Because, I mean, you're going into a place that's tough to win.
Yep.
You are. Like, that's a tough place to win. Like, they don't lose many games away. I'm sorry, at home. They have not lost a game at home this year. If I'm still on Arkansas here. No, I'm sorry, wrong team. Sorry, wrong team there. Tennessee hasn't lost.
They lost. They lost to Vanderbilt of all teams at home back on January 4th.
Of course, of course. It's always Vanderbilt. It's always Jerry Stackhouse. Just flipping me the bird. That's what it always ends up being. Like, they don't lose many games at home, and so I'm looking at a team here. This is a great opportunity against a great coach. Musselman's a great coach. And he's going to have something for him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know how you handle it. Can you handle, both of Tennessee's little quick, explosively quick point guards? That's going to be tough. Can they do it? Because I think you get a lot more out of beating a non-Kentucky team on the road than you do by beating the Kentucky team that you usually find a way to beat once a year. You find a way. Even in bad years, you find a way.
Yep. Yeah, and again, that's been a lot under Rick. Yeah, so that's been a lot under Rick Barnes. And it goes back to my point of, I don't want to take a win over Kentucky for granted, but you're right. They literally have not been swept by Kentucky since Rick Barnes became head coach, and that's impressive because I don't think there's another UT coach that can say that. I don't think Ramirez can say that. Don DeVoe, Bruce Pearl certainly can't say it. Buzz, Allen Houston, Kevin O'Neill, Jerry Green, they all can't say it. So I mean, that's impressive. But you're right. It's time for Tennessee to go in this season specifically and go get a win on the road that is impressive because they've had a couple not bad road wins, and it's hard. We're saying this, I feel like maybe people listening and saying we're saying this like it's an easy thing to do. I mean, it's hard for really good teams to go win on the road. Go look at Auburn. They lost. They were the number 1 team and lost to Arkansas on the road. It is hard to win on the road in college basketball because especially when you're a top 15 team or so, to top 10, especially top 5. Because you have that, like you said, you have that target on your back. You're a team that you go into that visiting and that road environment, and fans want you to go down. The team you're playing wants you. Like everyone there is rooting against you, rooting for you to fail, wanting to see you fall, wanting to see you lose to their team. It's not like you have at home or even a neutral site where it's either 50-50 or maybe sometimes you have more fans than the other team still in a neutral site game. Like it's not like that. It is a 80% or more of the fan base there is rooting against you. And it's hard to win in the road, especially in the SEC now. Like you said, the profile of this league has been raised over the last decade, where it's not easy to go out and win something against Auburn, for example, like it was 10 years ago, or Arkansas like they were 10 years ago. It's a much different league even than it was 5 years ago, in terms of just kind of the quality of the product and quality of really the top half of the league has gotten a lot better over the last 5, 6, especially last 10 years. But yeah, that's why this game to me is just as important, like you said, if not more important, because it's not a home game. It's a road game. And Tennessee has, like I said, like most teams this year, most teams every year, has struggled more on the road than at home because you're not used to the rims, you're not used to the court, you're not used to all this different stuff. And I remember people earlier this season, Gene, talking about in the I think Texas Tech game and the balls being different up there in Madison Square Garden or whatever it was. Like it just, I mean, playing away from home is different. Like you're not, the comforts aren't there. It's not the thing you don't practice in that arena. Or I guess you don't technically practice in Thompson Bowling, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's not what you're used to.
Not home.
It's out of the status quo. It's not home, right? Yeah, and that's what makes the tournament such a crapshoot, is because it's a new environment for literally everyone. No one's playing at home in the NCAA tournament, and that's why it's you see really good teams suddenly struggle because they've been maybe a team that's been really good at home, but has had issues on the road that year and just haven't played as many tough opponents on the road, and suddenly they get a poor matchup and it's not in a home environment, and suddenly boom, they're gone. That's why the tournament is just such an equalizer and a crapshoot, is because you're not playing in front of your home court. I mean, you can maybe get lucky and get put into a region where you're playing very close to home, but even that's still different than playing, in your home arena. So getting all to this point to wrap up here, Gene, I agree with you. And this Arkansas game is huge. And it is interesting. Like you said, it's been hurt by the fact that the SEC hasn't been great. They've just now started to get good, but Tennessee doesn't have that many ranked road wins when Tennessee's also been ranked, because they have had a couple here and there, I think, of wins against quality opponents on the road, but it's been when Tennessee's not been good themselves. But looking at when Tennessee's actually been a quality opponent and been a ranked team playing other ranked teams on the road, other than Kentucky and, again, a Missouri here and there, but looking at like a historically well-known opponent or a team that was having success that year and ended up being a really good team that year, Tennessee's road wins against ranked teams as themselves being ranked teams are few and far between. So this is a really good point, really good point by you. And I mean, like I said it too. I'll guess pat myself on the back. I think this Arkansas game is just very, very, very important. Before we do close out, Gene, we brought up that Missouri team from last year, and I had to bring it back up because you're right. They played 6 non-conference games before the SEC slate started, and they were 6-0, and they were ranked as high as number 12 because they beat a then number 21 Oregon on a neutral site by 8 points. They beat then number 6 Illinois by 3 points. And they had a true road win in the COVID era against Wichita State by 10 points. But then right before they played Tennessee, they had barely beaten Bradley of the Missouri Valley Conference by 1 point at home, and then Tennessee comes and beats them by 20. So they started out 6-0, and they ended that year. What did they end that year? 16-10, and got beat by 4 by Oklahoma in the NCAA tournament. So just revisiting that Missouri team, just because I hadn't thought about that. I'd totally forgotten that they had started that year so hot, and then lost to Tennessee, and the wheels came off for them. And that was, you're right. That was back when we were doing the I guess, well, hold on. I forgot they did bounce back a little bit. They came back and beat Tennessee later in January, and then the wheels came off shortly after that. Yeah. Well, regardless, that season was crazy. Man. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole league was just like, it was such a crapshoot because we would sit there and talk about it, and it was like, well, we know Alabama's won, we know Arkansas's too. We don't know anything else. We know, again, like we knew that Vandy was 14 and Georgia was like 13, or maybe it was the other way around. But
no, I think Vandy was bad last year. Or they were. Yeah, Vandy finished 3-13 in the league last year. Whew.
Yeah. So because Georgia did have a couple good pieces. I mean, they had the point guards at Kentucky now. Like that's
Yeah.
all we knew last year. But like, let me just simply say this. I don't want people to think I'm nitpicking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything that you can. It's not the worst thing in the world if you go to Bud Walton and lose.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
just simply saying there's so much you can gain from a victory. That's
Mm-hmm.
where I'm at. Like it's not about. I'm not going to come back on this podcast next week and say, "Man, they had a chance, they blew it. Man, they stink." I'm not going to do that. Like I'm going to sit there and I want to be as fair as I can about the game that was played. But I'm just simply saying there's so much that you can gain from this victory in my eyes, and probably in a lot of people's eyes, because this is a good Arkansas team. I don't think they're ranked, but they're good. Maybe they
They,
are ranked. I don't
they
know.
are. Yeah. They're number 23 right now in the AP
Okay, so
poll.
they're good. Yeah, I'm not surprised that beating Auburn gets you ranked. Um, but yeah, I mean, like that's what I'm saying. Like this is a good, even if they weren't ranked, this is a good Arkansas team that's tough to beat at home.
Yep.
And like, there's so much to gain for this Tennessee team, because can you follow up a big win? Can you follow up a huge win against a good Kentucky team that was the number one seed as recently as yesterday before the game? Um,
Yeah.
that's going to be those ones and twos and with all that stuff. It's going to be crazy. But that was a one seed before yesterday, and you kind of handled them easily. But how can you build on that? Like that's what I'm watching for. Like how do they play? Like it's not whether they win or lose. Can you go out there with the sort of performance that when I watch, I can take positives from? Because I want to take positives from losses. I want to look at negatives and wins. Because it's if we lost, well, how can we this is what we did well. How can we build on that? If we won, what are the negatives? How can we improve on those negatives so they don't happen again? Like that's how you improve as a team. I mean, like, and
Yep.
that's what I'm looking at. Like, so I'm not. If they get beat by 6, 7 points, and it's one of those, they're fouling at the end of the game, and Arkansas knocks down some free throws, and it gets to 9, 10 points. Because 5 years from now, all people are gonna look at it and say, "Man, Tennessee got beat by 10 or whatever." But like in the moment, you're watching the game, like, man, that's a winnable game.
Mm-hmm.
It's a winnable game, and like you can do a lot from that. Like if you get that game on a neutral site, it's a winnable game. You get rid of the crowd, whatever, and just take advantage of that. Like that's what I'm looking for, because that's what I want to see. So again, I just didn't want people to think, so, well, here he is just trying to just move the goalposts. I don't. It's not about moving the goalposts. I'm just simply saying there's so much that you can gain nationally from beating a team of Arkansas's caliber, because it's not about the ranking, because that's, to me, college basketball, the ranking is a crapshoot, completely a crapshoot. Um, and like, I'm not looking at it from that perspective. I'm just simply looking at it from, we all know that this Arkansas team is good. Probably not as good as last year, but they're good. And you go into that environment and win that game, and now it's like, okay, now going to the last 2 weeks of the season, we think this team has a chance to be special.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I mean, there was something else I was going to say to add to that, and it has since slipped my mind. I'm working off of like 5-ish hours of sleep because of the game last night. So bear with me. I think I did a good job holding up here, but I think that's a good spot to end this, Gene, because there's plenty more I feel like I could talk about. But yeah, this Arkansas game is really important. We could look ahead and look at other games, but I genuinely think that to kind of like you just did, like to operate like a coach, to think like a coach. Like I don't want to look ahead. I want to look at just this one game coming up. I don't want to look at what's after that too much, because this game's very important. And and for Vol fans listening, you can focus on this Kentucky win all you want. You can focus on whatever you want to. You're not the one playing. You don't have to worry about well, I have the focus for this game. I have to do this because if I don't do this, we're going to lose. You're not the one playing. Y'all can do what you want. Y'all can, go poke fun at Kentucky fans, do anything you want to, because you're not the ones playing it. Tennessee's players, they enjoyed that win last night. They're probably enjoying it still a little bit today as we're recording this on a Wednesday. But I can guarantee you, by the time Thursday morning rolls around, that game will be forgotten, and it'll be focused just zone in and focus on Arkansas, because that is not going to be an easy game. That is a very important game for Tennessee for their postseason hopes, for not just the SEC tournament but NCAA tournament. That is a quad one caliber game for Tennessee on the road. They have, I think, one quad one victory on the road right now. It's against Mississippi State. I think all the other road victories for Tennessee are quad two games. So they need to get another quad one road victory would be huge for them, and that would help them launch them into a potential 3 seed in the NCAA tournament at this point too.
Well, and one thing that hurts Mississippi State as we wrap this thing up, they stink. Like, they haven't won a game away from home. Like,
yeah.
So how good are you? Like, I mean, I'm sorry. I want to get off my chest. Another thing I want to get off my chest. We talk about it occasionally. We talk about it sometimes. We don't always talk about them, but I think that people are being too hard on this Tennessee Lady Vols team. I don't think anybody people changed their. I feel like a lot of people changed like their tune about this team when they got jettisoned up to number 5, 6, 7 in the country. This was never all that great of a team. They don't have great players. They've got a couple good players, but they're not like Tennessee Lady Vols teams of old. You get a lot of voters that get really excited because Tennessee's winning a lot of games against a bunch of average teams. Look at their wins. They don't really have. They beat a couple low to mid top 25 teams. But they're an average. They're in terms of what Tennessee Lady Vols basketball is. They're not nearly that yet. I think they'll get there as they stack a couple more recruiting classes on top of it. But they're a really good team, and I would not judge that Connecticut game just off of the result. If you look at some of the guys, some of the players they've got on that team, some of the women that they've got on that team, I was very adamant about people like Alexis Dye who were limited in some things they can do. They've got some players who are pretty good at one particular thing. But I wouldn't be too hard on that team because this is year 2 of that, or probably really year 2 to me of that rebuild, because that first year was just let's just get to the end of the season and then let's start recruiting, and then you get COVID. So I just wouldn't be. I just want to get that off my chest. 2 things I want to get off my chest were just those 2 things. It's a team that's going to have a good season, but we'll see what happens Sunday. They've obviously got a huge game against South Carolina. I just would not get too high or low about this team because, no, they're not the 1998 team. They're none of those teams. They are the early goings of a program that has a chance to be really good. And I just try to leave it at that because right now it's just too early for me to judge just what she's done because she's taking she's taking graduate transfers that can't shoot. She's got one shooter. I think the Darby girl can shoot, and they've got some younger players that have a chance to be good. Puckett, Darby, the other little guard that I think got hurt the other night. Wynn,
Brooklyn Miles.
They've got
or Kaya Wynn, one of those 2.
But yeah, I just want to get that off my chest. There's still some talent there. It's just young, and they're going to be good in time.
No, hey man, I'm happy for this to be your therapy session. We can do it for you and me both here in the season as it goes on and off season and stuff. We can be a therapy session for Vol fans listening too. So I don't care. You get whatever you want off your chest, man. I've done it before too. So
yeah, I just wanted to because we haven't talked since that UConn game.
Oh yeah,
and I knew I had a feeling that the reaction would be really, hostile towards them, and I watched a percentage of that game, and I'm like, who's the worst player that UConn has? Westbrook, who was the best player in Knoxville 3 years ago. That's the worst player they have. So and they're missing their best player. So
yeah, right.
I just did not want to. I just did not want this to be an indictment upon, she can't coach. No, I think people got too high on this team because everybody is just clamoring for the Lady Vols to quote unquote be back. There's certain programs in the country that you always just want to be back. The U in football. Texas, although I don't really remember a time that was before my time that Texas was consistently always good. Like there's program Notre Dame, like there's programs that will always get the benefit of the doubt, and the Lady Vols will get that. Like they're good, they're not quite there yet. But like the fact that she's got them to the point where people are itching to put them in the top 5, that just speaks to the fact the job she's done. I'm not here to protect coaches or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, you watch that team play, they're good, but they're good and they're big. The backup post player, Green, that went out, that hurts.
Yep.
Like I've always argued, like I think that the other post player, 6'7" girl, Key, she's good defensively, not great offensively. Because she scores points just because she hits 5 layups when she's 5 inches taller than anybody guarding her. That doesn't make her a great offensive player. She's great defensively. She's great at blocking. She's a lead at blocking shots. So 2 things she does. And when you just look, I mean, like they're basically rolling Horston out there to say, hey, go be Will Smith on that episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Ray Burrell, hit some shots, and she has limitations when she puts the ball on the deck. Like they're good. Like, please don't get me wrong, they're good. They're just not like that elite good where you are expecting them to be in the Final Four. They may get there, but nobody's expecting it. Like in terms of just how.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, and I think it's that's a good place to wrap up, because I mean we could do a whole another segment about Lady Vols stuff, and in fact, hopefully we'll have another.
It's not there yet.
Yeah, I think I'll have another Lady Vols podcast, hopefully not too long after this one comes out. So if you are interested in that, obviously pay attention to that, and they'll be out in the same feed that you get this podcast and on the YouTube channel as well. So thank you all again for tuning in to the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Really, really appreciate it. Again, like this video, subscribe while you're here. Again, leave your comments down below and let us know your thoughts on anything and everything we said here. And again, subscribe to us if you want to listen just to the audio on any podcast network you get your podcast. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael, and this has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.